Okay. Um, well, welcome everyone to Into the Quiet is the title of my lesson. We'll be talking about silence and solitude, hearing God amidst the noise. So just to introduce myself, my name is Joel Peed. This is my family, and my wife and I, Christy, have been married for coming up on 27 years. And we have four children now. We have three natural born kids. Jackson's 21, Carter is 19, Jordan is 17. By God's grace, they're all strong disciples and doing great. And then a few years ago, we adopted this little sweetheart. Jayana is her name. And she comes from just a horrible, traumatic, incredibly sad situation, but she's doing wonderful and has definitely changed our life. We thought we were going to be empty nesters, but God had other plans for another decade. So, anyways, that's our family. We've served in the ministry for about 30 years. I am also the chair of the Minister Health Committee of the ICOC. I've also started the Small Church Leadership Conference. We're about to have our third conference coming up in December. And I don't know what else. I'm shifting roles right now from leading a church to coaching, minister wellness, and become kind of a sabbatical specialist. So that's all exciting. But I want to talk about solitude and silence here today. Really, what I'd like, I guess, to go back and introduce myself. All those roles are great, but for this class, I have been practicing solitude and silence for about 25 years. The first 5 years of my Christianity was incredibly not silent. There was an incredible amount of noise, let's call it, and unhealthiness, and really reached the bottom and started to embrace Sabbath, solitude, that sort of thing. And it has radically, radically changed. So I speak to you primarily as a witness to the power of this spiritual discipline and as a practitioner. So my wife has actually entered into graduate school to get her master's in spiritual formation. I have a one master's degree, so she's taken over the higher education training in this area, and I'm just going to learn from her. So, but the idea of solitude and silence is not a common one in our fellowship, and so we are excited to talk about it. But historically, though, John Mark Comer wrote in his book Ruthless Elimination of Hurry that through church history, most of the master teachers of the way of Jesus have agreed silence and solitude are the most important of all the spiritual disciplines. That really surprised me when I heard that, but it's true. We do not, Henry Nouwen says, we do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set aside some time to be with God and to listen to Him. So this is a 2.5, about a 2-minute, 50-second video that really does a great job of illustrating the noise in our lives and how this discipline of solitude and silence can transport us into a spot to really hear and feel God's voice. So we're going to play this now. Oops, sorry. Let me try to share my screen again.
No, your screen's sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get the. Okay. So actually, even that last, I don't know about you, but that video, I love it because I can feel it in my soul. From the beginning and the noise and the chaos and the busyness until this amazing quiet and peace. And even the verse that was quoted, that God was heard in a gentle whisper, the actual language, it's hard to put into English words, but the actual language literally means the sound of silence. So I want to talk about into the quiet. We're going to talk about Jesus' relationship to the quiet, our relationship with quiet. I'm going to share a little bit about my own practice with this, or experience with this practice, and then a pathway into the quiet. Let's start with Jesus. Amen. Mark chapter 1. Let me go to slideshow. Sorry, guys. From current.
Yeah, it's just showing your PowerPoint. Yeah. There you go. Perfect.
There we go. Thanks, guys. Immediately coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens opening and the Spirit like a dove descending upon him. Immediately the Spirit impelled him to go out into the wilderness. And he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild beasts, and the angels were ministering to him. A couple of words I want to talk about. The word for wilderness is actually the word eremos, and it just doesn't mean like wild, uninhabited places. It means solitary, lonely, desolate. It can mean uninhabited, but it's a place of quiet. A desert, a wilderness, deserted places, lonely regions, uncultivated region fit for pasturage. It's also used of persons. And this is kind of a negative connotation, but the idea of alone, being deserted by others, deprived of the aid and protection of others, especially of friends, acquaintances, or kindred. But actually, when we think of, there's a big difference between being lonely and being alone. And for many, many years, was just so addicted to people, enslaved to people, and being with people, and feel like I need to help people, etc. And the idea of being alone had connotations of abandonment or selfishness, etc., or unhealthy escapes. But the spiritual discipline of solitude brings to the forefront, we see in Jesus, the necessity of aloneness in order to really quiet our souls. The word impel, ekbalo, it's the same word as casting out demons. So the Spirit came upon Jesus, and the first thing he does with Jesus doesn't send him to the crowds, doesn't send him to the lost, to the poor, to the hurting. He sends him to the eremos, into the quiet. And this word impel it's the same word that was just described to cast out demons. Okay, so there is to lead one forth or away somewhere with a force which you cannot resist. And I don't know if you've ever tried to get into the quiet or alone. It's not easy. Could there be a force of evil that is pushing against that? Mark chapter 1, so Jesus, 40 days in the wilderness, comes back for a day of ministry, and then we see him immediately return. In the early morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went away to a secluded place. So that's the word eremos again, and was praying there. Simon and his companions searched for him. They found him and said to him, "Everyone's looking for you." He said to them, "Let's go somewhere else to the towns nearby, so that I may preach there also, for that is what I came for." So even Jesus needed to get into the eremo, into the quiet, in order to be recentered, brought back to God's mission for him, not the people's needs or demands. Luke 5:16, of course, Jesus would often slip away to the wilderness and pray. So this was a habit we see with Jesus, that he was with people, and then he was in solitude, and he was with people, and then away from people, and very much a rhythm. Matthew 14. So like I said, we've tried to do this right, but then life happens. Like life happened to Jesus too. Now, when Jesus had heard about John, he withdrew from there in a boat to a secluded place by himself, into the quiet. And when the people heard of this, they followed him on foot from the cities. When he went ashore, he saw a large crowd, felt compassion for them, and healed their sick. So then he heals them, feeds the 5,000. But then listen to the inconvenient intentionality we see with Jesus in his dogged determination to get into the quiet. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, while he sent the crowds away. After he had sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray, and when it was evening, he was there alone. So as the 12 around him, he's like, he didn't just say, hey guys, I'm going to go up to the mountain. He said, no, you guys get in the boat. Not only get in the boat, go to the other side. Well, we got some, can we just, no, away, other side, right? And then crowds, don't go away mad, just go away. Okay, so he sent them away. After he sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself. So he is so deliberate with drawing down the noise in order to be alone in the quiet. So think about, just for a second, if you want to put this in the chat, you're welcome to. Why was Jesus so consistently and doggedly determined to enter solitude and silence? He was Jesus, right? Why? What was this pattern? Why was it so important to him? What may have hindered Jesus from entering silence and solitude? Well, Jesus can't. I mean, I'm busy. Really, do we hear ourselves? Like this was the Messiah. He had such a short amount of time, and yet he spent all this time in the wilderness. What could have hindered him? The needs of the people. Think about that. But then how did Jesus navigate these obstacles? Clearly, it wasn't overly rigid. He saw the crowds. He had compassion. He healed. He fed them. But then he still was determined to get into the Eremos. Okay. Besides Jesus, what other Bible characters do we see the Spirit invite into the quiet? As I started to think about this, it just starts to pop, like Moses, Elijah, the Apostle Paul, John, on the island of Patmos, the Apostle Paul in prison, different times on the road, the time he spent in the desert. So so often we see this. And in what form did this invitation come? In other words, we often don't go easily into the quiet. We can be drugged there, kicking and screaming. It's been said that if we don't go into the quiet ourselves intentionally, we will be put into the quiet through accident, through health challenges, through mental health challenges, all different kinds of things. Just something to think about. Places of quiet. So we're gonna talk about this a little later, but we're gonna keep moving. I'll talk about our relationship to the quiet, humanity's, my experience personally with the quiet. Andrew Sullivan, in his Manifesto for Silence in an Age of Noise, wrote this in 2016. Keep in mind, this was 7 years ago. Okay. Think of our cell phones, and we are living in an age where there's constant access to noise, and noise is access to us. So here's what he says about how this is affecting us. The new epidemic of distraction is our civilization's specific weakness. And its threat is not so much to our minds, even as they shape shift under the pressure, the threat is to our souls. At this rate, if the noise does not relent, we might even forget we have any. You think back to that video, what did you feel at the beginning with all of the noise? Our souls are not made for that. And so if we don't intentionally get into the quiet, our spirituality will get darker and darker. I want to talk about, so for me, this has been my experience. I'm a people person. I'm a natural extrovert. I'm a pleaser. But very early on in my Christianity, people caring was overcome by people pleasing. And all this tyranny, I was put into leadership way too young. I was leading a campus ministry of 60 people as an 8-month-old Christian. So all of a sudden, all of the needs of the people just was Lord of my life. And I was getting about 3 hours of sleep a night, going downhill seriously fast. So I experienced burnout as a, 1990, as a 23-year-old. I was burnt out. The tyranny of the loudest distance from my true self. Just being what everyone needed me to be, right? Distance from God. This undercurrent of anxiety never went away, and would flare up often. There's this idea of I'm never done. When we're never done, we can feel like I'm never enough for God. Layers of exhaustion. As I help people take sabbaticals, one of the very common experiences they report back is, I had no idea how exhausted I was and the depth of exhaustion that I was experiencing. Because we're just used to running on stimulants, caffeine, etc., which I love coffee, not condemning that. But when that's our fuel, that's trouble. We're exhausted. So then we have to escape to cope, because the inner comfort of God is not there. We become very emotionally unhealthy, take things personally. We're frustrated, we're angry quickly. We're triggered quickly and easily. There's a furthering distance from our true self in God. But then there's an interruption of that. And that's this discipline of solitude and silence. Come away with me. Jesus says to his disciples, come away with me to a quiet place. As I get away, it's been said, when people are big, God is small. I'm such a people-oriented person that they quickly become big. So if someone's upset with me, I'm internally upset, right? But as I get into the quiet, my soul begins to release people into their right size. And when people are small, like Isaiah says, that they're dust, right? Nations are dust, then God can be big. Sorry about that. Muted myself. Hopefully that wasn't too long. I start to slow down. My mind starts to slow down. I'm able to come back to the present. So it's very easy for me to run ahead into the future and worry and fear, or the past is what's controlling to the traumas of the past, the worries of the future, versus coming back to the present and experiencing the presence of God. I begin to feel things. As I begin to feel things, then the Spirit can comfort and process. There's a realness and healing in God's presence. God's voice becomes clearer and louder. There's a coming home. John Mark Comer has a quote in a minute, but we can come home home to a place of grace, acceptance, peace, and joy. Grace and peace to you was the Apostle Paul's. A place, a greeting, a place of being home. Your mission, your ministry become a calling of God, not a calling of the needs, but we're called by God into a ministry which we're designed, and we're centered, and it's clarified. Jesus, when he went into the quiet, he was able to discern, yes, the people are crying out, but is that really God's call? No, this is why I've come to preach the gospel in these other towns. Progression of quiet. I just want to share personally, I had a great family growing up. Matter of fact, it was so good that as the youngest child, I became, my family was everything to me. But then slowly my older siblings went away for college, and that was very hurtful. Why would they be leaving me? Oh. But then my dad, who was a minister, started to have some real mental health challenges with burnout and depression, and it got really, really dark. And I was the only one left at home, and I watched my mom and my dad go through some very, very intense things. And I was, as a 13-year-old, called into the middle of that to be the adult, really. And it was horrible. There was a lot of trauma. My mom and dad ended up being divorced after 29 years of marriage, and I just went into this place of just survival. And I thought I was doing fine, but my soul was really internalizing abandonment as no matter how good it is, it doesn't matter. It's just all going to be taken away at some point. And so I would live with this fear of conflict and this fear of depression. Anyone who was discouraged, I would have to fix them right away because it would just lead to horrible, horrible things. The idea of wilderness was you can't struggle. I can't struggle. And so eventually, after in 2003, we got sent off to lead a church. And then 6 months later, the letter came out, and that was quite a time. And so this is when I really started to embrace the solitude and quiet to hear from God, because people had to get put in the right spot. And I began to, God would communicate, no matter what happened to your human father, I will never leave you or abandon you. I will never forsake you. And I call it, as a 12, 13-year-old Christian, I became a son of God. God became my father. And I was able to heal. I was able to experience peace and calm in the quiet. And the more I did that consistently, the more that was able, then as I came around people, I was able to enter into in a healthy way, to love people and care for people, but not need people to be okay with me for me to be okay. So it's just one example of how the Spirit really used this discipline to change my life. Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. If you haven't read it, you need to. It's an incredible book. But John Mark Comer said, on Entering the Kite, says, we come to a place of freedom. Our failures slowly lose their power over us, as do our successes. We get out from under the tyranny of other people's opinions, their disapproval or approval of us, free to be just us, the mixed bag we are, nothing more than children with our Father, adopted into love, free to be in process yet to arrive, and that's okay. In silence and solitude, our souls finally come home. I love that quote. I believe at the heart of God into this discipline of solitude and silence is truly an invitation. It reveals God's desire and invitation into intimacy. And The desert fathers, the spiritual gurus throughout history have used the Song of Songs not just as a marriage wisdom, but a picture of the intimacy between Christ and his bride, the church. And I don't know where you may land on that. I think there's a lot of insight into us being the bride of Christ and what's communicated in the Song of Songs. But if you would give yourself, your soul, permission to listen to these words as an invitation from Jesus, with you as his bride. Chapter 4, verse 7, you are altogether beautiful, my darling, and there's no blemish in you. Come with me, my bride. You have made my heart beat faster, my sister, my bride. Do we even think that Jesus could actually feel this way about us? Do we sit in that space? Are we comfortable with that? How beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride. I love the idea of us being drawn into solitude because as unique individuals, no one loves God the way you can love him. No one, only you. And God longs for that intimacy with you. Oh, not me, not me. I'm guilty. I'm broken. And he knows. He handles that in Christ. Amen. And he wants that. But we're locked up, right? A garden locked up is my sister, my bride. A rock garden locked. A spring sealed up. But chapter 7, verse 10, the bride is finally releasing herself into the confidence of the bridegroom's delight in her. And she says, I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. Come, my beloved, let us go out into the country. There I will give you my love. It's, guys, this is hard a little bit for me to talk about, but in the solitude, in the silence, there's spiritual intimacy that the Spirit brings you into and helps you receive. I just want you to be able to experience that the way I have. Okay. What arises within us when we think about entering solitude and silence? What comes up in our souls? We need to pay attention to that. What hinders us from practicing silence and solitude? How have you navigated obstacles, just like Jesus had to navigate those? What have you learned in the process? A path into the quiet. The path into the quiet. I don't want us to talk theory here. I want to give you some steps, okay, that you can take. No matter whether you've been practicing this for years and years, or if you're brand new or never practiced it. Here's some concrete things. Number one, you have to be a planner. This does not just happen. The needs just do not end. And like, I mean, if you had an 8th day of the week, would that be a day that you could practice Sabbath? It just doesn't work that way. You have to be a planner. You have to plan 2 things: a place in time and a place in space. A place in time and a place in space. It's always going to be inconvenient and will always have to be intentional. So don't wait for it to be just perfect. What do I mean by place in time and place in space? On the left side or right side, whatever, it says place and time. So we see this quiet, this eremos, not just the mountaintop, but also not just in, Jesus clearly says, go into your closet, right? And close the door. and you'll be able to pray. So there's a dailiness, in our setting, we can find those quiet places. I'm gonna come back to this, but this is Jayana. And just last night, I took this picture last night. She says, Dad, come look. I made a quiet place in my closet. Like, oh wow, I can use this tomorrow. But she had pulled out her toys, and it was actually that little space under that bottom shelf was her quiet place. But she was so excited about creating this space. Didn't we all do this when we were kids, right? There was that special place that was kind of closed in, and it was quiet, and we were kind of hiding out, right? There's something in us about this, to go into our closet, right? So we have this closet, or we see Peter praying on the rooftop, right? But then you have Moses had the tent of meeting outside the camp, okay? And everyone would honor and stand at the front of their tents when Moses walked out to the tent of meeting. So, in a place and time, in a weekly basis, to have a special spot. I usually, if people are starting out, maybe 2 to 3 times what you normally spend in a quiet time. So if you spend an hour, maybe take 3 hours on a Saturday or a Sunday after church, or a Sunday morning before church, or I don't know, and have a special set aside time of quiet, extended spiritual time, seasonal. So God built feasts and festivals into the calendar of the Israelites, right? And so there were seasonal, week-long celebrations. And what I do is I take 3 4-day solitude retreats per year. And I've been doing this for a number of years, but it's completely alone, completely quiet. Turn off phone. I mean, when I say quiet, I mean like no noise, no music, this anything, quiet. Okay. And the amazing things that happen in those times, sometimes it's hard to put into words. Okay. But attentive meeting, and then the wilderness. So like seasonal things. And then we're really promoting sabbaticals as a part of our spiritual leadership rhythm of life. I've gone on 2 sabbaticals. Those are mountaintop experiences. They're not just vacations. They are spiritual mountaintop times. So every 7 years, you had to let the land lie fallow, right? There's a fallowness to the land's productivity. The land is just expected to keep producing, it won't, it can't, it burns out. And so there has to be a time to lie fallow. So places and time, places and space. You say, well, I can't take a sabbatical. Actually, I'm reading a book now that's all about people with ordinary jobs and how they can take sabbaticals. Okay. So it's not just academia. It's not just ministerial sabbaticals. This is becoming almost like over 20% of Fortune 500 companies now have sabbatical policies in place for their employees. Matter of fact, Microsoft, if you are on sabbatical and you work for Microsoft, if you sign into your work email, you will be fined. Okay. So just a plug there for sabbaticals. So you got to have a plan. Okay. And then once you have a plan, you have to prepare for this time. Preparing is essential. It's not just going to happen. You have to think about, what am I going to do? How am I going to draw down the noise in my life? What are sources of noise? And I'm not just saying noise in our ears, but noise in our souls. What are those sources, and how do I eliminate those? How do I extinguish? How do I draw those down? And I communicate for myself. I communicate with our church. I'm going to be off the grid for 4 days. Please pray for me specifically. Please pray for these things. Okay. So preparing the people around you. If you have kids, you're going to probably need support. So asking for support from other people, etc. Oh no, what happened? Something happened. I'm going to stop this again. And I'm going to share again. Sorry, guys, something. Okay. I'll hit this button. It's not advancing. There we go. Okay. So entering the quiet. So it's time, you've prepared. Now it's time to enter. And there, it really helps to have something symbolic. For me, it's I turn off my phone. My phone represents a lot of things. And turning that physically off. Some people will, the Jews would have what they called a Sabbath box, something that was symbolic of their work they would put into that box. It was a physical thing that represented that the time is drawing to a close and I'm entering into this time prepared for quiet. Okay, so you have to enter in. Candles are a common expression, lighting candles. I'm not really a candle guy, but I know a lot of people who are. Okay, path. So, and then experiencing God's presence. So you've planned, you've prepared, you've entered in. Now what? Now what do we do? Right. So this is a space now where we can practice all of these spiritual disciplines that we're learning about. But one of the things that I'll share. Here's what I do. Okay, I start with some fun. So usually it's a meal. Maybe I love food. Okay, so it's good food. I love to. It's kind of silly, but I grew up in the '80s, and for some reason, Cheers, just the little sitcom Cheers, just ministered to me. You want to go where everybody knows, you know. So it's just comforting. Okay, so go ahead and laugh at me. You know, it doesn't have you don't have to do that, but I do. I have fun, and then rest, like turning off the clocks. When your body is tired, you go to sleep, and you don't have an alarm clock. You get up. You let your body sleep as long as you want. And when you start to wake up, you have that kind of in between, just stay in that half awake spot. Like don't rush into your day, really letting your body rest. This is what we see with Elijah, just layers of exhaustion, 2 days straight of sleep. And then for me, reading, of course, I read the Bible, but I don't read. I'm very careful not to read things to prepare for lessons or things the church needs. I call them my comfort scriptures. Isaiah, like comfort food, right? Comfort scriptures. Isaiah 40 through 45, the Psalms, Psalm 23, Psalm 18, Psalm 92, anything Jesus, right? So comfort scriptures, journaling. Journaling really helps my mind spin out. I call it letting my mind spin out. If you just say, okay, just think about this. My mind gets distracted. In the only way I've found to handle that is to let it spin out, and then slowly it comes back. Journaling really helps with that. For me, walking, long walks in nature really, really help. Delighting in God, allowing God to delight in me. Not like I allow God. I allow the experience of God delighting in me instead of being so down on myself and disappointed in myself. Processing those things and then hearing next steps. Okay, so that's experiencing the presence of God, experiencing the present time, experiencing the present of your life. And then learning. Here's a big thing. This is years of practice. I was just talking to a brother today who went on his third retreat, and the first one was horrible. Like it is just like there's so much to learn, but gradually you gain a little bit more of what your soul needs, what your body needs, what your mind needs, and you develop habits and disciplines. and repeating those things. So let's think about this as we close. Which of these steps on the right hand, the path into the quiet, which is most challenging for you? Which is most challenging? What tips have you found most useful in entering solitude and silence? What can you practically do going forward to enjoy this spiritual practice? What I would like to do actually is just take a minute right now. I'm going to stop talking. And I want us to practice a little quiet right now. And let the Spirit bring to the surface some of these things. A few seconds left. Man, I don't know about you, but even that, 1 minute, it's amazing. So let's embrace these disciplines. If this is new, please read on this. There's so many good resources. I would really recommend Ruth Haley Barton, Invitation to Solitude and Silence, or Invitation to Retreat, or Sacred Rhythm. She does a great job of really communicating vulnerably and openly. Peter Scazzaro, the idea of a daily office or a rule of life. Rule mean not a bunch of rules, but more like a trellis of life to build. Ruthless Elimination, or the Listening Life by Adam McHugh was profound. Guys, please advocate for your spiritual leaders to take retreats. If someone's in the full-time ministry, please advocate for them to go on sabbaticals. We're losing ministers. We're in a minister crisis. And we have to take care of the ones we have. They need this time alone. It's not just a vacation. It's what I do. Please communicate with my wife or I. But we partner with boards, elderships, leadership groups, ministers to help them experience, the whole congregation experience the blessing of a ministerial sabbatical